You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by bbbgive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
This is the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by bbbgive.org. Give.org is the nation's standards-based charity evaluator, and it's your one-stop source for information on giving and reports on the most asked about charities. I'm Art Taylor. Today, my guest is Dr. John D. Damon. He is the CEO of Canopy Children's Solutions, Mississippi's largest and most comprehensive nonprofit provider of children's behavioral health, education, and family support solutions. John works with all three branches of government, business, thought leaders, and community to develop public policy, clinical best practices, and catalytic partnerships aimed at helping every child and family reach their full potential. I am really pleased to have John join me today. So John, welcome to the Heart of Giving podcast.
Art, thank you, sir, man. It's a real honor to be here with you today.
Well, John, first of all, I just want to say that there's a lot of challenges, especially for young people, but families in general. And so it's really remarkable that I get to talk to someone who is willing and able to address some of those challenges, especially in a place like Mississippi, where we're always hearing that there's such a major challenge with poverty and other issues. And you've been doing this for a long time, 31 years,
That's right.
which is a remarkable amount of time to give of your life to helping others. So what I want to start with, John, if you don't mind, is just tell me a little bit about the organization and what it is that draws you to this mission, which is one, as I said, that's so important for us to begin to address. And then we'll get into some of the challenges and obstacles and the extent of the problem that you're actually dealing with.
Yeah, thank you, Art. So it's interesting, when this organization was established over 100 years ago, it was established to help kids that were being abandoned on the orphan trains across the country. And yet it was set up not to be a home for children, but to find permanent, loving homes for children, to see kids thrive in their own home, in their own community. Fast forward 112 years, society's gotten more complex, and so have we. And we've continued to iterate the way we do the work that we do to respond to whatever the vexing challenge is for kids and families in our communities. We pivot and we run at that problem with great, zeal and partnerships to solve those problems. And so who we are today is radically different than who we are and were 10 years ago, and where we're headed will be very different. And I think that a word that we've invented for ourselves is nimbility is required to constantly flex to meet the needs of kids and families and let their voice lead the way of what our responsibility is to serve kids and families. And as the largest provider in the state for kids, that comes with a huge stewardship responsibility. And we take that very, very seriously. So it is, and as you mentioned, Mississippi, has been 50th in many things that you do not want to lead in. And I would say Mississippi has a long history of innovation. First heart transplant, and other organ transplants. You think of our innovation in the arts, the William Faulkners and the Eudora Weltys and the John Grisham, the many writers we have. You think of the music industry with B.B. King and Muddy Waters and Robert Johnson started the blues. All of that, Elvis Presley, all this Oprah Winfrey from Mississippi. There's something special about, um, you know, when there are no other things to lean on. How do you innovate? How do you find creative, innovative solutions to the most challenging problems you're facing? And so we've embraced that, and we love that, and I think that's been part of the way that we've continued to successfully serve kids and families.
Well, how has that gotten you so connected to it
Man,
personally, though?
so when I was a kid, um, I we had a pretty storybook early childhood, followed by alcoholism with my grandfather, um, that led to parents' divorce, that led to dad moving to out of state. Mom had to go get trained for the first time because we had way too much, and now all of a sudden she had nothing and had to go to work. Um, while away, our home burned down. While my sister and I were doing hide and go seek, the lamp was tilted and lost everything, including my best friend dog Pete and old English sheepdog, everything we ever owned. So I'd lost family, I'd lost everything, and yet there was one person that came along and made the difference in my life. They were transformational, and I remember even as a little kid, like I want to be that person. I thought that was in medicine. I started out, pre-med route and doing that, and but through a lot of, I think, divine intervention, that got redirected in a good way. And I have been passionate about being. It just takes one person to change the course and trajectory of someone's life. And it started as a clinician. I was a clinician, a therapist, and did that for many years. Reluctantly got pulled in administration. I did not want to do administration. Um, my master's was in marriage and family therapy, which is a systems training. So when I said I would do interim administrative work where I was, what I began to see, Art, was that I could still do systems intervention, systems therapy, but at a more macro level. And that's what I do now. I work with our government and our policies and all of that to do systemic intervention to help kids and families. So my why is directly connected to my what, which is the only way you can do this and run hard. As we were talking earlier, I don't have to go to work. I get to go to work every day. And it's incredible that I get paid to do what I get to do, working with the most incredible team on the planet, a board that's just off the charts incredible, and to step into a mission that's, a mental health crisis of our lifetime. It's a privilege. It's a real privilege.
Yeah. You mentioned that there was someone who affected you in a positive way at your worst moment. Say more about that if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Let us get a glimpse of that, because
yeah, man. So I would.
Now, I want to preface it with, individuals don't often understand the impact that they can have on another person's life. We always think, well, what can I do? Right.
Yes.
And here you are, you have one person that you give credit to for altering the course of your life in a good way.
Yep.
So I really would love for you to tell that story.
Man, thank you. So after our home burned, I ended up moving for the first time in my life to a new school. Did not know a soul. I mean, I knew not one person there. And there was one guy, Jody, who we ended up becoming friends. His dad was worked for Youth for Christ, who had a whole ministry that they worked with kids, and they took me kind of under their wing. Their family, him as a friend, the network of friends that I developed around that, the kind of close small group that we started together at that point that continued from sixth grade all the way through high school, and then for the five of us through college. We stay in touch on a perpetual, multiple times a week basis now. That friendship, who also brought me resources of adults to help ground the chaos that was my life at that time. And also taught us to give back. I mean, he would take us to the Boys and Girls Club in the middle of downtown Jackson as the only two white guys in the whole place, and drop us off and say, I'll be back later this afternoon. And there was something really special about figuring out relationships and my role in the world. But that friendship became an anchor for me, and the relationships and my faith that changed my life and gave me a foundation upon which all the other stuff, it was anchored. It didn't matter what was happening outside. It really became an anchor point as well as a North Star about my purpose.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a little bit more about this experience at the Boys and Girls Club where you were the only two white guys?
Yeah.
And I want to ask you that because obviously we still have a very divided country racially.
Yes.
And yet I believe we all want the same things in our lives.
100%.
And you, coming from a majority background, now being a minority in a particular setting, what was that like, and what did that teach you?
Look, man, I was before the house burned, I was in a private school, all white. All right, so that's where I'm coming in, and now I'm in a context where it's all black. Poverty. I came from a well-to-do family, and now I'm poverty because we lost everything. And all of the identity things that you don't realize that define who you are. What matters to you? How do I find commonality as another human being? I had so much in common with everybody in that gym. We all had broken homes. We all had difficult families. We had difficult finances. We love basketball. We love sports. And there was so much more that joined us than separated us that, we just began to look forward to going and having those times. And what that was really formative without me knowing it was formative. As I moved through life and then, was in this role, when I had a year-long interview for the CEO job, despite the fact that I've been here for 20 years. I wanted to be treated, do a national search. Let's do a comprehensive kind of interview because the direction that I want to go is going to be very different. And we need to have a mutual understanding about that, like a very thorough discussion. And after I was hired, and I had still a good almost year ramp up before I was actually going to take the job, start. Very first meeting I had was with our past president, African American, incredible leader, attorney here in town. And the very first thing I did is I asked her to go to lunch. And I said to Dorian, I said, look, when I take this job, I feel a great sense of stewardship responsibility. We're working with disadvantaged kids across this state. And if we don't live in a congruent way and reflect a culture of understanding with kids who have transgenerational trauma and poverty, and if we don't have a culture inside the organization that really has honest conversations about race and about diversity and equity and inclusion, then we can't congruently live that out in the community. And so the very first hire I had, that was 10 years ago, I guess, was to have a chief diversity officer who, this was way ahead of Floyd and all that happened there. Not because of how some folks have unfortunately moved for politics or what have you, but because our core value that relationships matter. We've only had one constitutional amendment to our values, and it was that one where we added not just relationships matter, and our differences make us stronger.
Mm.
And we really believe that. And so if we're going to do the work well for kids and families, we have to do the work well inside the building. And we've got to live that out. We got to really value our differences and realize that's our secret sauce. That's a strength to have these differences, so that when we step into homes, we congruently live out that value with our kids and families. Yeah.
Wow, very powerful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about the organization.
Yeah,
You mentioned it's been around for over 100 years,
that's right.
and you're now seeing, I'm sure, like most of us, an increase in our recognition of the effects that trauma have on people.
That's
And
correct.
you're working especially with young people to address that. Tell me about the nature of the problem, the scale of the problem that you're dealing with in Mississippi, and then we can talk about how you're working to address it.
Well, we serve over 8,000 kids a year, um, and that's not like a backpack drop. That doesn't equal. We're talking about a kid in one of our schools, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for a whole year. One, a kid in our autism early intervention, 25 hours a week, all year. Two, so we're pretty deeply involved across all 82 counties in the state, and almost every kid, with some exceptions of some populations, have experienced some form of trauma and difficulty. We work very closely with Child Protection Services. When abuse and neglect happens in our state, if the child is not considered imminent risk in that particular moment, we're called to go in to work with that family to see if we could keep that kid and family together and out of state custody. And for over a decade, we've had a 97 or 98% success rate of keeping those kids and families together, diverting over 6,000 kids from state custody since 2019. And so when we talk about trauma, when we talk about not just lowercase t trauma of I didn't make the cheerleading team or what have you. That's real for kids too. I don't want to discount that, but we're in some pretty difficult spaces with trafficking. We have two children's advocacy centers that do the forensic interviews on the Gulf Coast for kids that have been exploited in some way. They see nearly 1,000 kids a year, just constantly interviewing very difficult situations. So we work very closely with all the systems that involve that work, and in a trauma-informed way. So everything we do is deeply rooted in a trauma-informed approach of how we approach that kid, that family, with a very difficult situation, knowing that the biology has been affected, the brain is being affected, and the behavior can often be explained in many ways because there's a deeper need under the behavior. It's not just snuffing out the behavior that's a challenge; it's getting underneath the need. What happened to this kid? Not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you, and let's understand that.
Mm. Wow. Tell me about what it looks like, your organization. So you mentioned that you're all over Mississippi. What are we talking about in terms of employees, volunteers, medical teams, etc., locations? Yeah. Give me a sense of the scale and structure of the operation.
Great question. So we have around 600 mission-driven, staff around the state. You can kind of have three superordinate buckets if you wanted to kind of think on we don't call them programs either. We call them solutions. People don't come to us for a program. They want a solution. So you could organize the solutions into three big buckets. So behavioral health, and I can unpack that, education, and then family support. Okay. The behavioral health might be some of the traditional things you would think about, like outpatient clinics. We have those around the state for anxiety and depression and et cetera. We also have the clinics, the behavioral health clinicians that go into the home. And so we do that across all 82 counties. So you have clinicians that do intensive in-home work so that maybe that kid can prevent coming to an out-of-home placement because their behaviors are challenging. We also have autism early intervention for kids 18 months to 8 years of age that are led by a great doctoral level Johns Hopkins clinician with a great team under him. We have deep end behavioral health for kids with very significant behavior challenges into psychiatric residential treatment. So this is a 24-hour care. They have individual, group, and family therapy. You asked about the teams with child psychiatry, nurse practitioners, every type of marriage and family therapy or licensed professional counselor, licensed clinical social workers. AA certified teachers. We have on-ground schools for all of those kids. So lots happening in the behavioral health. Then we run schools too. Three schools that are for kids that aren't doing well in the local public school. They have a special education ruling, and the district says could maybe they come and get a little more intense help with education and behavioral intervention, get them in a good spot, and then return back to their school. And then we have another school that's kids not so much behavior challenge, but learning challenge. So dyslexia and autism, et cetera. And then the family support side is mostly where we're going out to the homes and working with those families in a very intense way to, like I mentioned earlier, divert those kids from entering state custody. Or we do like social determinants of health risk families, those who maybe the call hadn't come to CPS yet, but they're at risk for that. And so we go in and work closely with those at-risk families to help them with employment, with getting a job. They're sleeping in a hotel or they've been kicked out, and we help to connect them with local community resources so they can get back on their feet. And we do that across, all 82 counties. And so I mentioned the forensic interviews and so forth. So you imagine a team of clinical folks as well as, from a mental health perspective, as well as educators and medical professionals. It takes a whole team of kind of different disciplines and interdisciplinary approach, to come alongside these families.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
that's pretty unbelievable that you're able to organize this entire thing. And I've seen leaders who are managing organizations, across the spectrum from the largest to the smallest. And this is quite impressive what you're able to do. Mm-hmm. How are you able to support the work that you're doing financially? I know that this is not something that comes cheap. What are you able to do to raise money to make all of this happen? So
first, we have wonderful partnerships with the various state agencies, and a lot of our funding comes, I think it's around 84%, Medicaid, Child Protection Services, Department of Human Services, Department of Education, Health Department, Department of Mental Health. So think public relationships there. A lot of fundraising that we do with gracious donors who are aligned with our vision for kids and families and our values, and we run at that together. And then, one of the real innovative things that we're able to pull off that's been transformative for us is we took the data I mentioned earlier with diverting kids from state custody to the state house to tell the legislature we're losing on average about $400,000 or $500,000 a year to save the state tens of millions of dollars a year. And we leveraged that data to get a tax credit passed that would allow the business community to donate up to 50% of their state tax liability to a list of charitable organizations that were doing work to prevent kids from entering the foster care system. Wow. And so that has brought about tremendous partnerships. We've done 2 ribbon cuttings in the last 2 weeks of new schools that we have in South Mississippi. Our partner at at Trustmark Bank, for example, has committed $3 million over the next few years to help with that school, the capital resources that we need to do this work. If we didn't have the tax credit, and the CEO who was speaking at the ribbon cutting said the same thing, we didn't have the tax credit, this would not be possible. So that's some of how we've kind of run it at some of these projects to fund some large capital needs.
And how are you feeling about the impact that you're having across the state?
Man, I tell you what, we start every meeting, Art, and I don't care if it's the board finance committee or every meeting with a mission moment. And so,
I love those.
It just grounds what you're about to talk about with why you're doing it.
Yeah.
And so we hear those mission moments every meeting, every day, which are just so inspiring. And we're big on research and trying to look at metrics, right, and that matter. And so the really great news is that we get to see those outcomes and demonstrable outcomes across the board in every sector that we're involved in. Whether that's educational outcomes, or that's mental health outcomes, or that's diversion from state custody outcomes, or convictions for the bad guys that were doing forensic interviews. I mean, we simply couldn't keep running at something hard if we weren't making an impact. We're just too data driven, to have that happen. And in fact, part of what, Art, we've been doing a big investment in has been around the digital transformation. And we've got a whole digital transformation team that is running at how we integrate digital technology in every aspect of our business so that we can eventually, it doesn't matter what the data point is. You want to know what the outcome with this, even in a live meeting with the board, we can click on it right then and there. We're not there yet, but we've laid all the foundation. We got a great team that's running at that. And so that impact for us is everything. If we're not making the impact, we shouldn't do it. And I look at things like this, just that one example of kids in state custody. Just several years ago, Art, there were over 6,000 kids in the state that were in state custody, and we've moved under 4,000. That's fantastic. That's a lot of kids sleeping in their bed at night with their families that otherwise would be in a system that can be very traumatic.
Yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned digital transformation, because as you know, this society is going through its own digital transformation with AI. And I'm wondering if you've begin thinking through how AI can assist in any way in creating more information sources for people who are afflicted by trauma or having issues and need help. Have you come across any likely opportunities for use of those kinds of technologies that you're trying to explore?
Here's the reality. It's going to change everything. It already is. When we had our strategic planning with Deloitte that we wrapped up and had three core kind of pillars that we're running at. One of those was to really, develop kind of deeper roots around digital transformation, communication, some clinical expertise, kind of the measurement, learning, and evaluation, all of the data side. That includes all things AI, right? A second tier is about partnerships, how we get wider and have bigger impact through transformational partnerships, not transactional vendors, right? And then a third element was how do we grow taller through innovation. We were talking about innovation. We have a whole innovation team that takes things from concept to pressure testing to pilot to scale, and how we drive innovative ideas forward. But the AI piece, one example maybe that ties all three of those together. We've been doing a project with some partners. I'm a fellow with the Aspen Institutes, and we have to do what's called a venture project. And this is kind of, we're excited. Mississippi, we were talking about earlier, 50th. This is the first venture project in Aspen history that's become a mega venture, if you will, in which you've got multiple fellows working on one project. Nice. And in that project, I have two key collaborators, both that are co-founders, CEOs of technology companies, and one of those is helping lead the effort in the AI side. And so we're in Chicago this weekend, actually, together working through this, and it's a big part of their strategy. It's a big part of the technology we've developed together to screen and triage and then navigate folks to mental health care. And we've piloted that in schools here, some in the Madison schools here, and we're about to move into some relationships with payers and managed care to look at that at a broader, health kind of implementation. But AI and the work that Get Well and them are doing is going to help really inform all of that work that we're doing now, because you're talking about this many kids, this much workforce, particularly in Mississippi.
Yeah.
How do you make sure their kids get to the care that they need? And it's not going to be through an individual cranking it. We're going to have to be a lot smarter. But I think what's different, and part of what we're doing that we think is different, it's a novel approach, is another app is not going to solve the mental health crisis. AI is not going to say, there's not going to be a AI therapist that's going to solve. But if you can get high touch, which is what we do across all 82 counties, married with high tech, so that you take the best elements of AI and technology and the human element, because when you get to the Delta in Mississippi, I don't care if you have billboards saying this is the best tech ever. If the pastor or the matriarch of the neighborhood doesn't say this is good, forget about it. So we have to marry high touch with high tech to reach people and make this thing that kids carry around, in their pocket a source of good, and not evil, and all the things that we've read about in books like The Anxious Generation and others.
Yeah. Very impressive. And I love the way you're thinking about the human-centered approach to AI, making sure that it's about enhancing what humans can do to help each other in this case, but to also help themselves. So really impressed, and you should be too. The Aspen Institute is a significant organization for you to be a fellow of. One of my guests and friends, Dan Porterfield, runs that Aspen Institute, and they're doing tremendous things there. So good that you're connected.
Thank you. It's a real honor.
We're getting to the end, and I just want to pick up on one thing you said.
Yeah, ma'am.
And that's about the whole issue of trust. People don't tend to trust institutions in the way that they have in the past. And you pointed out that if it isn't the pastor or the matriarch in that community that's getting behind it, it's not going to happen, even if it could be the best thing in the world for people. 100%. So what do you do to make sure that people can trust you and the organization so that they can actually get the help that they need?
Art, I could not have asked you to ask a more important question. When I told you that I did a year-long interview with the board, the cornerstone of that was about trust. I don't know if you're familiar with Patrick Lencioni, organizational health work, but the foundation of how you get to results starts with trust. And there's a couple types of trust. There's predictability-based trust. Are you going to do what you say you're going to do? You said meet me at 2. Are you there at 2? Whatever it is. But the deeper kind of trust is vulnerability-based trust. Are you willing to take a risk? Are you willing to say, I need help? Are you willing to say, I'm not sure what to do with this? As a leader, right? Leaders have to go first. And be vulnerable. When you have vulnerability-based trust, the next rung on that is you have healthy conflict. If you don't have trust, you're still going to have conflict. But it's now personal, not ideological. That's the key. So deep, implicit, vulnerability-based trust leads to healthy conflict, not personal, that leads to a commitment about what we're going to do, right? Because once you've had a chance to weigh in a healthy way, you can now buy in and commit to what we're going to do. Once you have commitment to what you're going to do, then you can hold each other accountable to do what you said you were going to do. And in that context, accountability flows more from a love than it is, I got you. Because, man, we've agreed that these things are vitally important for us. And you didn't have it done Tuesday when you said you were going to have it done. What is up? We can't, that's not okay. The mission's too important, right? So trust, conflict, commitment, accountability. And when you have strong accountability, you get results. Yeah. And it works every time. So to your question, you take that at the microcosm level of what happens inside a senior team, and particularly between the CEO and their board. And you have that kind of trusting relationship that's transparent, that's real, that's vulnerable, that you communicate bad things quick, that everybody has an implicit trust to know that I'm for you and you know that you're for me. And therefore, in that context, we can say what we need to say to each other in a healthy, and Mississippi's not known for conflict, right? So I'm working counterculture because everybody, how are you? I'm great. How are you? How's your mom? It's all. So to get to real conflict, which is the secret sauce of making great decisions for kids and families, I'll literally stop our team when they're in a good fight and say, pause. This is exactly what you must do in this moment. Because if you don't have this fight, we don't get it right for kids. Keep going, fight, go. Keep going. And that kind of culture, Art, to your question, ensures that trust happens from the inside out. Not us walking in a billboard or a website or a commercial saying, trust us, we're your solid mental health provider. That's not going to work. It has to be congruently lived in a way that the staff believe it, the staff live it out, and then they can not communicate that to those that they're working with. I think that's how we develop for the staff to feel safe. And, it starts with us caring for our people. We have to pour into our people for them to feel trusted. We got a retreat coming up. We love that. We do a lot of CEO, lunches and town halls and lean-ins and listens and all of that, because if you have good trust within the organization, the families' lives are going to change. It's that important for us to get right. So I appreciate you asking the question. That's like the central, most important thing I think that we can do to help our community.
Well, John, I really appreciate this. And I want to just mention to everyone, you've been hearing John Damon, who is the CEO of Canopy Children's Solutions in Mississippi. And they're doing great work there, helping children and families thrive under difficult circumstances. John, I just appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your work and your life with us.
Art, it's been a real honor. Thank you for the work that you do to continue to spread the good work that is happening across this country. We're really grateful. And I appreciate the partnership to help get the word out for kids and families and the struggles that folks are having. Their hope is real. It's a central piece we embrace, that hope is not a wish, that the future can be brighter than your past, and that you have the power to make it so. And we train people on actual hope as a science. It's a corner piece. And so I appreciate you helping make that hope real for the listeners. So thank you for having me today.
Well, it's my pleasure. And listen, to all of you who are listening to this show, know that this is a weekly podcast. The Heart of Giving podcast comes out every Tuesday with a new episode. And I hope you will subscribe to hear more stories about organizations like Canopy Children's Solutions and the work of people like John Damon all across this country. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so by simply subscribing to our show. It's free of charge. If you want to make a donation, you can do that by going to our website, give.org. We will certainly put that contribution to great use. Thank you for listening, and I hope we'll see you back here next week.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.